Okay, for history today, we're going to do it this way with a video because I can focus on getting you guys to focus on me on video, and then I don't have to do all that yelling. Okay, we have a goal. We're going to step back from the revolution and everything. We're going to actually move forward in California, but we're going to take a moment for Indigenous America, Native American America. And I've mentioned to you before that history conveniently, we're trying to use a word other than lie, but often truths are not told. And it has to do sometimes on purpose, sometimes not. It's just perspectives. So, one of the big perspectives is that this continent was wild. When it was discovered, this continent was wild and untended, and it had some people on it that disappeared. It's kind of like it was just, you know what I mean? Like an empty, wild lot. Not true. Significantly not true. So that's our goal today. Dispel the myth that North and South America were wild and just had some people on it that are here, not here anymore. It was cultivated. There's now strong evidence that the land here was managed. Sorry, my notifications. And there was not just some people here, that there were 100 million people here by the 1500s. 100 million. All across Europe. All the way across Europe, they had 70 million. So, how did they come over and take over? I think guns and germs. We'll get into that. So, I want to look at a timeline real fast just for perspective. Okay? First of all, we call North and South America the New World. What is the Old World? The Old World was Europe. And the New World was North and South America. Hey, that wasn't somebody's new world. It was somebody's world. I'm going to show you Google Maps for a second on another computer. Let's look at this. Okay? There we go. You see that? Yeah. There we go. New World. Technically, South America, North America. Old World, Europe. The continent of Africa. Yes, where they were starting to kidnap slave populations. So that itself is a perspective and a lie of history. Just calling this the Old World and that the New World. From whose perspective is this old and new thing from? The Europeans, obviously. Okay. Timeline. Let's just orient on what we've been learning, and I'm going to mention just a couple of things. Okay, here's a timeline from the 1500s to the 1800s, okay? Let's just say, like, the revolution started 1776, went 4 years, really. Washington's presidency was 1789 to 1797. Yeah, it took them from 1781 to 1789 to get their act together with the Constitution and everything, the Articles of Confederation. That's another whole thing. For our perspectives, I just want you to know 1776 was the revolution. 1789 to 1797 was the Washington presidency. English people started landing in the New World really around then, 1607. Jamestown is considered one of the first settlements. They found Jamestown recently, trying to dig up a golf course in North Carolina. And, the shores of Virginia? It's supposed to be in Virginia. It's over there. They found it. If you just Google Jamestown, you get this website of archaeological digs. But the other fourth thing that I want you to know is that from 1542, that was the exploration of Verrazano, an Italian, to the 1600s, there was all kinds of small visitations to the continent. Many kind of bold explorers, pirates. And that's probably when the germs started landing on the continent. Remember, we talked about the Columbian Exchange, that tomatoes, potatoes, and corn didn't exist in Europe. Cows, pigs, disease, and swords made out of steel and guns didn't exist in the New World. There was an exchange, but it wasn't a very fair exchange. Pause this. That's the first question. I want you to type these out. So if you need to pause it, pause it. What are the 4 events I name on the timeline? Okay. You've paused it. You've answered the question. I'm going to be watching you. Let's do a little reading. This book. Come on. Come on. There we go. Sorry. It's all backwards. An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States for Young People. I'm just going to read a page or two. That's it. The Valley of Mexico and central part of America and South America and North America were settled so much by around 8,500 BCE. Scientists in all 7 of these areas, societies, were domesticating plants, cultivating plants. That means planting plants and harvesting plants that didn't exist in just the wild. You had to plant them and make sure they happened. And this, the most important plant of all these, which definitely altered the landscape, was corn. Okay, so that's the second question of the that I want you to pause. And I don't have writing for this. You're going to have to do some writing, but listen. This system of dating, we're 2024, and the 0 point is Anno Domini, the birth of Christ, and the Catholic Church saying that Jesus dominates all of history, blah, blah, blah. It's a very European Catholic Church perspective embedded in our year number system. So before that 0, Anno Domini AD, is BC, before Christ. So when we're saying 8,500 BC, we mean go back 2,024 years to 0, and then do another 8,500 years backwards. So that's more like 10,000 years ago. 8,000 BC was like 10,000 years ago. So now, because the Catholic Church doesn't dominate everything anymore, scientists started calling the dating system BCE, before the Common Era, instead of before Christ. However, isn't it the same container? So that's your question that I'd like you to answer thoughtfully. How is our dating system a European perspective? Well, it's based completely on the Catholic Church's interpretation of history through the birth of Jesus Christ. It's just got scientific labels on it now. That's it. Pause and answer that question. Okay. You've paused and answered that question. Now I am going to go on and do some reading. Just a little bit. Okay. Corn, a sacred food. Prior to 1492, when Columbus landed, corn did not exist outside the Americas. We know that, the Columbian Exchange. Scientists have evidence that indigenous people in central Mexico cultivated corn for the first time 10,000 years ago, 8,500 BC. So just so you know, indigenous. The definition of indigenous means naturally occurring in a place. Native Americans are indigenous people. They are indigenous to the land. They didn't come over from Europe. They've been here. Where did they come over? People are trying to answer that question, and they don't have an answer, actually. They think they do, but they don't. Go to college and study it. 12 to 14 centuries later, a century is 100 years, so 12 to 1400 years later, corn production had spread from the Central Valley south, some of that central part of Mexico, south to the tip of South America, north almost all the way to the North Pole in the subarctic, and on both coasts, Atlantic Pacific Ocean, of the North Continent and the Southern Continent. Corn had spread in 1400 years across 2 continents as food. There is evidence. The proliferation of corn, but also other crops such as beans, squash, potatoes, required vast networks of cultural and commercial exchange amongst these indigenous people of the north, the center, and the south part of America. So what they're saying now is they're getting hip that the proliferation of corn, beans, squash, potatoes across these 2 continents in 1400 years was because they traded. Now we know the Olones were very happy because they were just food secure, but not all the indigenous peoples were as food secure. And they're taking this food as evidence that they didn't just stay in their separate little tribes and never talk to each other, that there was an active network of trade, travel, and interaction. There was stuff going on this continent that we don't validate in history. We just say it was just a bunch of natives living in the trees. No, they cultivated these plants and they got them across the whole continent. And the existence of these plants is evidence that they traded vastly and had vast trade networks. So that is a question on the document. Pause and answer that now. Did you answer the question? That the food is evidence of vast trade networks. That we can't just sit there and say they were just little ignorant tribes that never got anywhere. No. A little more. Thousands of years ago, indigenous scientists, yes, he's calling them scientists because they did trial and error. They didn't have lab coats and beakers. It didn't mean they didn't do field work, observation, cultivation, knowledge, indigenous knowledge, indigenous science. Thousands of years ago, indigenous scientists turned a wild grain into a food source that sustained their bodies and their spiritual lives. Unlike other grains, corn cannot grow wild. Without attentive care from indigenous peoples, it would not exist. That means you had to water it and farm it and fertilize it and plant it and watch after it. It didn't just do wild. The people of Central America cultivated corn in many colors. It was even grown in deserts. Yes, the Hopi people have a whole thing around blue corn, and they grew it in the deserts by the, what do they call their dwellings? Kivas, pueblos. It was even growing in deserts and other areas that were dry. Growing it required complex watering systems. By the end of the 1500s CE, Common Era, or AD, 1500. By the time 1500 started coming around. 1500. By the time 1500 came around, from 8500 BC, okay, so that's like 10,000 years, okay? By the time the 1500s came around, the total population of what we call North and South America had 100 million indigenous people. Approximately 40 of them lived in the north. Approximately 30 lived in Mexico. And approximately, 30 million more lived in South America. Across all of Europe at that time were only 70 million people. Scientists attribute this significantly larger population that we don't always say existed in Americas because they were a relatively disease-free society. They didn't pass around a lot of diseases to themselves. And it was specifically from herbal medicine, surgery, yes, evidence of simple surgery, dentistry, yes, dentistry, keeping your mouth healthy makes you live longer, and hygienic and ritual bathing. Natives bathed a lot more than European people. They did. These kept diseases at bay. And then when you have whole populations that are healthy and not encouraging diseases, you start to become disease free. But then that also made them very vulnerable to influenza, smallpox, diseases from Europe. That is, we're very responsible for wiping out a lot of people. So that's the last question. How did this population grow? We said herbal medicine, surgery, dentistry, hygienic and ritual bathing, keeping disease at bay. Thank you for letting me lecture you on Indigenous America and American history. Let's talk about it more.